The Friday mailbag returns this week, and we got some great questions to get to. You guys asked about Al Golden's future, Marcus Freeman's official visit policy, and a whole bunch more. That's next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Welcome to Locked On Irish. It is Friday, July 7th, so happy Friday, and thank you for making this your first listen of the day. As always, you can watch a full show on YouTube or listen on your preferred podcast platform. If you're new to the program and like what you hear, please subscribe to the channel so that way you can stay up to date on every new episode once it gets released in the future. I'm Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and cover college football as a producer at the Fox Sports headquarters in LA. I've also been podcasting about the Notre Dame football team since 2020, and we're bringing back the Friday mailbag this week, and my old co-host Luke Smith is going to join me here in just a few moments to answer your questions. We talked about recruiting and specifically Marcus Freeman's policy regarding commits taking official visits, Al Golden's future at Notre Dame, and we close with some ideas about how the school can prevent Ohio State fans from taking over the stadium come September. Thanks as always to everyone who submitted your questions this week, and if you want your question answered in future mailbags, send them in on Twitter at LockedOnIrish or slide in the Instagram DMs at LockedOnIrishPod. Okay, let's talk to Luke. All right, Luke Smith joins us here. I'm excited to catch up on Notre Dame football because it's been a few weeks since we've done this, but honestly, I guess I could start by asking, are you still a fan of the Irish, or are you like some of the people who I've seen denounce their fandom because Justin Scott picked Ohio State over Notre Dame? I've actually seen quite a few of those people doing it.
I'm doing all right. I haven't quite jumped ship in that direction yet, so thanks for checking in, but I think I'm okay there.
Is it even possible for you at this point? Like, what would need to happen for you to jump ship? Because you have been on record saying that you would go see Notre Dame play in Afghanistan if they were 0-12. So I'm not even sure what it would take for you to denounce your fandom.
Maybe like hire Jim Harbaugh or like something like that. I don't know. Like let's not even consider that. But yeah, I don't know. It's a good question.
All right, on a semi-serious note, how would you describe your mood about the program right now? Because overall, it's been a pretty rough offseason, I'd say, since Sam Hartman announced that he would be transferring to Notre Dame. But there's still plenty of reasons to be optimistic and excited about what this team can accomplish in 2023. So it's sort of a weird dynamic right now.
I think the sense I have of everything is just a sense of restlessness. And that's why things like Justin Scott committing to Ohio State, which, I mean, if you listen to this show, I don't think anybody ever thought he was going to Notre Dame. So that shouldn't really be that big of a downer for you. It just shouldn't. Things like that, things like Isaiah Canyon decommitting, even Logan Diggs and Tyler Buckner transferring, they're not really that big of a deal. Obviously, they're disappointing, and I get why people probably have some frustration or disappointment with what seems like a pretty lackluster recruiting class, in just that outside of CJ Carr and Cam Williams, it kind of just lacks some star power. But in the scheme of things, it doesn't impact what should be a really promising fall for Notre Dame, okay? They brought in a guy with 45 starts at quarterback who is one of the most accomplished statistically quarterbacks in the history of the sport. They have a dynamite offensive line. They have a bunch of receivers that people are really excited about going into this year. So I think that it's really just a sense of restlessness, and we need to get games going. And as you pointed out to me earlier today, fall camp is just 3 weeks away. So I think that this is a fleeting moment. And once you start winning some games, then the recruiting misses, or whatever you want to call it, are going to start taking care of themselves. So I think that just frankly, people don't have a lot to talk about right now. And that's why we're seeing some of the reaction that we are seeing.
That is certainly a problem. The lack of things to talk about other than recruiting is definitely contributing to this. And to your Justin Scott point, you're right. We've talked about it on this podcast, how I didn't think Justin Scott was going to go to Notre Dame, and you didn't either. But I
think I called anybody who thought he would an idiot. So I may have gone that far.
For context, though, when we were having these discussions, it was like May, maybe even late April. But there was a time at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, when I don't really think I'm breaking any news here. It's like the worst kept secret around, is that Justin Scott was actually a silent commit to Notre Dame at one point, which I think leads us to our first mailbag question. This one comes from at DrewBrennan77, and he asked this question before Justin Scott even announced his commitment to Ohio State. And he was basically asking, Why are so many people obsessed with Justin Scott when so many of us already know how this will play out? So this is before he committed, but Luke, what do you think? Why do you think so many people were and still are still talking about this recruitment?
I guess the proximity to Notre Dame probably plays a role, just being a Chicago Catholic League kid. As I've long stated, I don't believe that there are 5 stars in that league. So I was always dubious of that fact. I legitimately think St. Ignatius went like winless when I was in high school. So it's frankly remarkable that they've stockpiled any talent there in the 8 years since. But I digress. I think it's the proximity to Notre Dame. I think it was because I remember when I first heard about Justin Scott, it might have been going into his sophomore year. So this is summer 2021, right? And he really liked Notre Dame. His parents really like Notre Dame is what we heard. And I think that when you hear that early on and you see that it's a kid from Chicago, it just seems like something that should happen. So I get why people were fixated on it. But to Drew's point here, I don't know if it's ever worked out where a kid has been a silent commitment and that commitment hasn't gone public within, the 2-week span after that silent commitment, that the kid ends up going to Notre Dame. It just doesn't happen. And that's, I think, the funniest thing to me is like people then always like, well, this is going on. Oh, there's no such thing as a silent commitment, going back to Dante Moore. And then we hear months after the fact, oh, actually, he was a silent commitment. Can we just stop saying this? Like, I understand that these recruiting analysts have a job to do, but it's just comical at this point. But to answer the question, I think it is the proximity to Notre Dame. We've heard about this kid for so long. There are so many St. Ignatius Wolfpack alums who go to Notre Dame, and I think that for that reason, people probably thought, well, this should just be a slam dunk. It wasn't. As it turns out, not every kid in Chicago likes Notre Dame.
Okay, real quick, who's the powerhouse right now in the Chicago Catholic League?
That's a good question. It's so big now. The conference that I played in high school, the East Suburban Catholic, has been absorbed by it. So it's probably still Loyola, to be honest. I think Loyola has gone to pretty much every state championship in 8A since I can remember. They're always in the hunt. But, I'm not kidding. Like, St. Ignatius was horrendous at football when I was in high school. So that's why I just have never really bought into this. Like, that doesn't add up to me. There's no way good football players go to that school.
And you pointed out the proximity. It is sort of surprising because a lot of people ask, why doesn't Notre Dame get more guys from Chicago? Well, maybe that's the problem. Maybe the league just kind of stinks.
It's a basketball city, not a football one. I think
true.
That's the way I frame it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I think to answer Drew's question, I think there's multiple things at play. You already mentioned a few of them. The main thing to me is not even at the proximity. It's just that he's a 5-star who is on the defensive line. And even if you might think he's a little bit overrated, Notre Dame just doesn't land 5-stars that often, especially on the defensive line. So I think the problem is you get into so many situations now with these guys, and Notre Dame just hasn't been landing these 5-star players, especially on the defensive line. And we already talked about it, the fact that he was a silent commit. Fans all knew that, so they got excited. And I think this actually relates back to everything that happened with the class of 2023. Notre Dame had 8 total decommitments in that class. 8 is a pretty staggering number. 2 of those were 5-stars in Keon Keeley and Peyton Bowen. 2 were high 4-stars in Dylan Edwards and Brandon Hillman. So now there's just this angst that whenever Notre Dame gets these type of guys, or they're really close to getting these types of players, they keep falling short. And now Scott joins that group. And you think about if Notre Dame were to land all of those guys, how differently we'd be talking about Notre Dame recruiting right now and really the team going forward. So now with every almost get, I feel like the next one, there's just more angst, there's more anxiety about it until Notre Dame is finally able to get one of these guys to commit and stay committed on signing day and then actually play for Notre Dame.
Yeah, when it rains, it pours, right? You just expect everything bad that can happen will happen. Just like I heard, somebody you've had on the program before, Mike Singer, earlier today, talking about it might be Notre Dame and Harvard for Gerby Lambert now. If he ends up at Harvard, that would just be a great capper to what's been an excellent couple months of Notre Dame football here. By the way, I was not exaggerating, or maybe I slightly was. I looked. St. Ignatius while I was in high school, 1-8, 1-8, 3-7, 2-7. So, that's why I'm saying, I'm shocked by this.
It makes total sense. And, whoever the next Justin Scott is, I don't know who that player is. It might be Deuce Knight. He's the quarterback in the class of 2025 that Notre Dame seems to be after pretty hard. He's not a 5-star yet. I mean, that could change. He's still got a lot of high school football left to play. But whoever that player is that Notre Dame is really close to getting, and he's a 5-star, like, I'm preemptively nauseous about talking about that recruitment because it's just going to be a lot until Notre Dame finally gets one of these guys. This episode of Locked On Irish is brought to you by FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you could spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. All in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. Let's move on to the next question. This one comes from @DanielLockie1, who asks, how common is the, quote, commits can't officially visit elsewhere, end quote, thing across all of college football? So I looked this up. Clemson has a very strict policy. After a prospect commits to Clemson, that's it for taking recruiting visits, official or unofficial. And if he does take a visit, their scholarship gets pulled. Corey Foreman, the player, the former 5-star defensive end who committed to Clemson early on, ended up at USC. This sort of policy became famous around that recruitment. Brett Venables claims to have this policy as well. But when it comes to players who are committed to other schools, a la Peyton Bowen, he isn't as strict. So those are really the only schools I could find that they're publicly that have this policy publicly. But what are your thoughts on Freeman's policy?
I understand it and why he has it. And frankly, I've kind of always thought it was silly that these guys do take visits after they're visiting, after they're committed to another school and vice versa. I've kind of always thought it's not really the most ethical thing for Notre Dame to go after committed prospects either. I kind of have a problem with that. However, it's the nature of it. And given that, I think it's a kind of foolish policy to have, particularly with some of these high profile guys where if you look at the recruiting rankings right now, I know Georgia has a lot of commitments, but Alabama, Ohio State, like they're significantly lagging where Notre Dame is. And that's because they're in the fight for these 5-star guys who drag the recruitments out to the fall. And that's what you kind of have to give these guys the flexibility to do in order to be in the fight for those. And I think you've talked about this before. Notre Dame seems to really be pushing guys to make early commitments. And there seems to be a giant rush there. I think that goes hand in hand with this policy. And for that reason, I think it's a little bit foolish. I think it puts Notre Dame at a disadvantage it doesn't need to be at. Now, I don't know. Is there something to the effect of with some of these guys, maybe it's a longer process getting them admitted to the university? This is literally just me throwing that out there. I have no idea. Maybe that's why they do it that way. I would like to know, because that policy and just that push to get guys early in, they don't compute otherwise.
Yeah, I think on the surface, I get it. You want guys who want to come to Notre Dame, and if a player is willing to commit publicly, this seems like a reasonable thing to ask of the recruit, to not take official visits elsewhere. And the case for this policy would be that it keeps guys from looking around as much, and if a prospect doesn't take official visits elsewhere, obviously they're more likely to stay committed. But I'm with you. I don't know how effective it is for Notre Dame's cause. Like, it clearly didn't matter at all in keeping Peyton Bowen around. He still managed to take unofficial visits at Texas A&M. And if you're listening to the podcast, I'm using air quotes because even though they were considered unofficial, one, it was like an hour drive away from where he lived. And two, I don't imagine that the Bowen family was paying for a whole lot. Now, I'm speculating here, but still I feel pretty good in that assumption that they weren't paying a whole lot during these recruiting visits when he was going to Texas A&M and Oklahoma every weekend throughout the fall. And it's not like the Notre Dame coaching staff is just going to stop recruiting guys once they commit either. So I'm with you. I think it makes sense on paper, and you're like, oh, okay, like I get it, but that's just not how recruiting works anymore. I think it hurts Notre Dame more often than not. Imagine if Notre Dame didn't have that policy. Does Justin Scott end up committing to Notre Dame publicly on January 31st, even though Georgia had just offered him? I don't know. But I feel like having a player committed publicly is probably a better thing to do. Brent Venables has said that he actually encourages players not to commit. I think that's odd because of this policy. I mean, he says that if a player is willing to commit, he basically talks him out of it because he knows that this policy is in place. I don't know how effective that is overall. I don't know if that's a good thing for a program to do. And look, like recruits want to take official visits. They get the celebrity treatment every single time. I get why a 17-year-old wants to do that. Do I, as a 27-year-old, think that they're over the top? Definitely, but they're not for me. They're for those 17-year-olds. So I'm kind of torn. On one hand, I get it, but overall, I just don't understand, or I guess I don't see the benefit to Notre Dame, especially with these top guys.
I don't either. And I think that is why it has to be, what's the word I'm looking for? It has to be revisited to some extent because they're putting themselves at a disadvantage where they don't need to be. There are already so many disadvantages they have. Why create another one for yourself?
Exactly. And you pointed out how all these top programs, they're still in the fight for a lot of guys that are going to go until the fall. What is the benefit of Notre Dame getting a commitment from Teddy Rizak or Bodie Cajon this early? Like, how does that, drastically change things for the class? It doesn't make any sense to me. And think if Notre Dame gets a commitment from a player like early on, like very early on in the process, say during their junior year of high school, they end up blowing up as a recruit. They start getting a lot of attention from other schools. It would make sense for that recruit to look elsewhere and consider all of his options. But if Notre Dame is like, no, don't do that, then Notre Dame kind of looks bad in that situation. I know that the player committed. I know that he probably committed prematurely, but then it really hurts Notre Dame's chances where if they're like, hey, we get it, we want you to consider. But then once that player decommits, it's very rare that a player decommits publicly and then comes back to the class. I know that there are some examples. I think Deion Colsey did that. But more often than not, that's not how it works. So why even put yourself in that position in the first place?
You tell me.
Okay. All right. So we're on the same page with this one. Okay. This next one comes from @VoluntaryJoel41. Rank the following most to least likely. Number 1, Notre Dame makes the college football playoff and Al Golden returns in 2024. Number 2, same as 1, but Al Golden leaves for the NFL. Number 3, Notre Dame's defense is much improved, but don't make the playoff and Al Golden takes an NFL job after the season. Option 4, Notre Dame's defense is stagnant or worse, and Al Golden gets fired after the season. What do you think?
So I'm going to be optimistic here because despite some people's complaints about him on the recruiting trail, I do think Al Golden has some skill as defensive coordinator. So I'm going to say that the most likely scenario here is Al Golden and the Notre Dame defense are improved, go to the college football playoff. He takes an NFL job after the season. I think that the next most likely scenario is that it's an improved defense, doesn't make the playoff, but he still goes to the NFL. Basically what I'm going to say is that I do think this is probably his last year on staff. I don't see this defense being worse somehow. I know that, well, first of all, we're talking about them like they were like a bad defense last year. They had some really bad red zone numbers, and I know it took, 100 years to get a turnover, but once they figured that out, it was a pretty good defense all in all. And I know they lose the twins and Isaiah Foskey and Brandon Joseph, but I think this should be a pretty good defense still. They have linebackers that have like a combined 500 years of experience, as well as some younger guys there who are going to play a lot this year. So I feel pretty good about this defense. I just wouldn't be surprised if this is Al Golden's last year on staff.
Yeah, 2 years with the coordinator at this point in college football, especially at Notre Dame, is kind of a long time. So my first one, I feel like the safest bet is that Notre Dame's defense is much improved, but the team doesn't make the playoff and Al Golden takes an NFL job after the season. Second one would be Notre Dame makes the college football playoff and Al Golden leaves for the NFL. So we're on the same page. We both think he's gone after this year for the NFL. At 3, I have Notre Dame makes the college football playoff and Al Golden returns in 2024. I just feel like if Notre Dame does make the playoff, Al Golden is going to be a pretty hot commodity. I don't know if he's going to want to be a head coach at the college level anymore. I think he does want to eventually get back to the NFL. Makes sense to me. Doesn't have to recruit, which is something that maybe he doesn't love based on some of the results we've seen. And 4, Notre Dame's defense is stagnant or worse, and Al Golden gets fired after the season. I'm with you. I don't think Al Golden is going to come back after this year. I also think that there's a little bit too much negativity surrounding what the defense was. They were 39th in scoring defense. They gave up 23 points a game. The problem with the defense last year was not that they gave up a ton of points, is that they gave up points when they absolutely could not afford to do it. I mean, the drive against Marshall when they just needed one stop. Like every time they needed a stop late in the game, or most of the time, they just couldn't get it done. So those drives, those points that they gave up were louder than I think the overall numbers would suggest. But Al Golden has been under fire a lot lately, recruiting and really just the lack of a great defense last year. So how do you feel about him overall?
I think a lot of it is a bit much, to be honest. Sure, maybe he's not Marcus Freeman on the trail, but some of the stuff is just patently false I've seen out there. I mean, there are people on the board saying he never once visited Justin Scott, and we have pictures of him at Justin Scott's high school basketball games. Like, just don't lie. It's just like, why would you even make that up? Also, we know a guy who coaches at a premier high school program in the country that's turning out prospects that are going to Georgia and big schools like that. And he has met Al Golden on recruiting visits and spoke glowingly of him. So I get that every person is different. We've spoken with coaches firsthand who have met with him and said he's great on the trail. So I think that this is all perspective. Everybody's going to have a different experience with every single coach, but I just don't think it's fair to just say, oh, he's terrible. He doesn't know what he's doing, because this class isn't, what we had when Marcus Freeman was on the trail as a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is he's getting compared to Marcus Freeman, who was a very, very effective recruiter, especially when he was a defensive coordinator. And frankly, he's not as good as him. Okay, there's still a benefit that he provides to the team. Although I do think if this becomes a trend, say he is at Notre Dame next year, and the recruiting class is not that good, then you really have to start looking at it like, Al Golden, what are you doing? Pick up the slack, because even if people like him and stuff, if he's not bringing in the results necessary to compete at the highest level, then yeah, it's going to be a problem. But I don't think it's fair to make all those assumptions now. So looking forward, I think there's a lot of pressure on Al Golden. There's a lot of pressure on really every coach on the staff this year to succeed for Notre Dame in 2023, because I think, like you mentioned earlier, if Notre Dame wins a lot this season, the problems, the misses on the recruiting trail are going to fix themselves. But Al Golden is basically the new Tommy Rees. He's going to be the he's going to be the coordinator who pretty much is the subject of all the criticism when things go right, when things go wrong. It's really not going to matter unless Notre Dame makes it to the college football playoffs. So we'll see what happens with Al Golden, but it kind of goes back to there's just not that much to talk about right now. So Al Golden is just the subject that everyone wants to talk about now.
Yeah, him and Al Washington. I mean, just people need to get lives. Just who cares? But seriously, get over it. But anyways,
we are some of those people that need to get lives, for the record.
Oh yeah, no, I don't have any hopes of finding one. That's the difference.
That's true. All right, let's get on to this next question. This one comes from Ricardo Caliente, who asks, this is like a 2-part question. So, rank the top 3 players who transferred out of Notre Dame in the portal era that you wish were still on the team. And for this, I think the transfer portal started in like October of 2018. So we'll do that. And then second part, also, could you run through some of the other departed transfers and where they're at right now? Like, where the hell is Jordan Johnson? Let's get to the Jordan Johnson one first. Where is he?
You can't actually find him on the official roster, but if you look at his Instagram, it appears that he is playing for the Iowa Western Community College Reavers after an unsuccessful stint at UCF. So, like I said, can't find him on the roster, but if you look at his Instagram, post a couple photos in uniform at practice. So that's where Mr. Johnson is, still without a collegiate catch.
All right, so if you're listening to this podcast and you are one of those people who are clamoring for Jordan Johnson to get more snaps, despite the fact that the coaching staff was like, yeah, we aren't really sure if he could play, before you start commenting on this video, think back on that. Okay, let's get to the first part of the question. Rank the top 3 players who transferred out of Notre Dame in the portal era that you wish were still on the team.
Yeah, so for the sake of this, I'm answering this as if they could be on the team today, right? And Logan Diggs is probably the obvious number 1. Even though that transfer was inevitable, he would have played a huge role on this team this year. So I'm going to say that. Number 2, I'm going to say Jacob Lacey, who is now at Oklahoma, I believe, right?
Yep.
Bizarre transfer. Honestly, what that reminds me of is like kind of like an NBA player who just gets fed up and requests a trade request mid-season, because that's kind of what happened there. Like, he had a great game against Cal, didn't play against North Carolina, and then it's like, I'm hitting the portal. It's like, what are you doing? There's a ton of – you're going to play a bunch. He would have played a bunch this year, and Notre Dame needs guys on the interior. So I think that would have been really critical to have this year. And then third, I went back and forth here between Prince Kollie and Ovi Ochefu, but ultimately landed on Ochefu. He had a ton of success at Texas, and now he's at LSU, which I didn't know until this morning, but that's where he is. So I'm going to go with him, a guy who played in the college football playoff for Notre Dame against Alabama a couple years ago. It's on his 6th year of college. That'd be nice to have.
Yeah, so I've got the same 3, different order. I've got Logan Diggs at 1. If him and Estime were both on the team, they would make for, I think, what would be the 3rd best running back duo in the entire country, and would add another proven dynamic player to the offense. So I have Jacob Lacey at 3, and then Ovi Ochefu at 2, because I think Notre Dame needs an edge rusher more. And he started 12 games for Texas last year, had 8.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, a forced fumble, and 3 pass breakups. Now he's at LSU, like you pointed out. Yes, I realized that Texas's defense last year wasn't the best, but still, Notre Dame could use pretty much any edge rusher, and he would certainly fit that mold for the team this year. And then, Jacob Lacey at 3. I didn't understand his transfer in the moment. It makes even less sense now. I understand the timing of it because he wanted to preserve that year of eligibility, but he would, I don't know if he'd be a starter, but he would be the first guy off the bench at a position that rotates literally all the time. But I think what this says, if we're looking at this bigger picture now, is that most of the guys, like the vast majority of players who transfer out of Notre Dame, don't experience a ton of success. The outlier to that, although he's ineligible for this exercise because he exhausted all of his eligibility after last season, is Dylan Gibbons, the guard who transferred to Florida State. He was a 2-year starter for the Seminoles. He became one of the team leaders and was actually first-team All-ACC in 2022. He would be a surefire starter for Notre Dame if he were on the team right now at guard. And I remember when he transferred, I didn't really think that much of it. I was like, oh, he would have been on the tube deep. That's a bummer, but Notre Dame is loaded at the offensive line. So credit to him for excelling outside of Notre Dame. But I think in the portal era, he's probably, or he certainly has had the most accomplished player or accomplished career of any player who's transferred out of Notre Dame.
I mean, I remember going into the 2021 opener, seeing he was starting for them, and being like, geez, this offensive line must be atrocious. So yeah, good on him for really making something out of nothing down in Tallahassee.
All right, let's go. Do you want to go back through some of the old guys that transferred and sort of do a where are they now?
Sure. There's got to be some random ones.
All right, let's go through it. We already all know the ones in this recent transfer portal class 2023, so let's go to 2022. Sibo Flemister, he went to Pitt. I think he played a little bit at Pitt.
He's still on the roster.
Yeah. George Takis went to Boston College, didn't do a ton, but he was their number 1 tight end last year. JoJo Johnson, remember him?
Yeah, I think he's also at Iowa Western Community College. I'm serious.
Is he really?
Yeah.
KJ Wallace went to Georgia Tech. A lot of Notre Dame to Georgia Tech. I noticed that when going through these transfers. Jay Bramblett, the punter, went to LSU. Quinn Carroll went to Minnesota. I don't think he's done a ton. Caleb Offord, completely forgot about him. He went to Buffalo. Kari G, another Georgia Tech guy. Shane Simon went to Pitt. He was okay. He played a little bit for them last year. I think he had 2 sacks. Litchfield Adjavon went to Rice. Not going to lie, I haven't looked up Rice stats lately. Brendan Clark, the quarterback, went to Old Dominion.
And then retired.
Yeah. He had all those injuries on his knee, right? And then Lawrence Keys went to Tulane, right?
Yeah. Decent little run there.
Yeah, decent little run. Famously or infamously quit the week of the Michigan game.
No, that was not
Michael
him.
Young.
That was Michael Young. He quit after not playing the Florida State game, or only playing like four snaps right. Or whatever. Yeah.
Michael Young quit the week of the Michigan game. So then we go to the year before. Jay Brunell went to Rice. Dylan Gibbons went to Florida State. Jordan Johnson went to UCF first. Kendall Abdur-Rahman, he went to Western Kentucky. He's in the transfer portal again, doesn't have a home.
Just a horrible take from Dell.
He
was like recruit number 800.
Yeah, he was. He was actually worse than that. He couldn't play at Western Kentucky and then put his name in the portal again. Ovi Ojefu, Texas, we already mentioned him. Jack Lamb went to Colorado. I think he was okay. Isaiah Rutherford went to Arizona after his freshman year. Didn't really do a ton there. Jameer Smith, Appalachian State. Colin Grunhard went to Kansas. Jafar Armstrong, Illinois. None of these guys have really done anything.
Pretty sure Jafar transferred again, too, to Western after that.
Yeah, he did. Jamian, I always forget how to say his name. Franklin, he went to Duke. Jordan Kembar Heath went to UCLA. John Olmstead went to Louisiana, I believe. He was actually a pretty decent recruit. He's a 4-star, but basically...
Yeah, I think he had a kid at Notre Dame, and then his priorities shifted.
And being a dad took precedent over being a college football player. So, look, we could keep going through this, but honestly, once you get back to 2019, Phil Dracovic went to Boston College. I guess he's had a semi-accomplished career, even though he hasn't really done much. There seems to just be a lot of hype around him. We'll see what he does.
Still going.
Jonathan Jones went to Toledo. He actually was a dark horse candidate for me. I almost picked him because he actually had a really good season that 1 year at Toledo, the year that they almost beat Notre Dame.
Yeah, but he did ruin that Michigan game in 2019.
Maybe the most inexplicable penalty on that punt. So for that reason alone, he was not allowed to return back. But really, Notre Dame just hasn't lost a ton of talent in the portal. A lot of the guys who leave, there's usually good reasons why they left. And then if we were to even go back before the portal era, obviously there's guys like Aaron Lynch and Greg Olson who obviously Notre Dame would have loved to have kept those guys. But Whenever Golson transferred, I thought he'd be really good at Florida State. He did start the first 8 games or so, and then he got benched. Malik Zaire didn't really do anything at Florida. So if you look at the track record, a lot of the guys that Notre Dame has brought in via the transfer, even though there have been some misses, have been better than the guys who left.
Yeah, that's definitely true. But yeah, you're right. Greg Olson and Aaron Lynch kind of stand above the rest of the fray there.
Okay, let's get to our last one here. This one comes from Drew Brennan 77 again, who asks, should Notre Dame make the Ohio State game this year the Red Army game in honor of the backup quarterbacks? The entire Notre Dame team could wear red jerseys, and we could ask the fans to wear red for the day. That way, we wouldn't have to worry about Ohio State taking over the stadium. But I'm going to give some love to Drew here. Thanks again for the questions, but also he very clearly stated that he was joking with this question. So what do you think, Luke? Is this a good way to prevent Ohio State takeover?
I mean, the honest answer here is that what they should do is they really need a more careful eye on the tickets that they've sold to alums and then seeing who ends up in those seats. Because anybody that sells their ticket to an Ohio State fan should be banned from Notre Dame Stadium for life. Like, I don't care how much you're upselling it, you're banned for life.
Do you think that the university keeps track of the season ticket holders and how many games they actually attend? Like when they scan their ticket to enter the stadium, does that go into a database somewhere that the people in the ticket office could go back and look at it and evaluate these people are actually using them or these are just selling them?
I mean, there's probably not enough technology for it. You probably need the use of photographs and videos, but I'll do the audit for them because I don't want those people buying tickets. They should not be allowed. And if you're listening to this and you're one of those people, you're absolutely shameful and don't even think about it this September. That said, I actually don't think it's going to be that bad. I really think they actually kind of made tickets tougher to get for the Ohio State game this year than they've done in the past. They were never on sale to the general public.
And the site just didn't work. Yeah,
that too. So I think it's going to be more similar to Clemson last year than Georgia of shit. That's almost 6 years, which is kind of scary, but you get the point. I don't think it's going to be that bad. I'm sorry. Those inbreds from Ohio are not taking over the stadium.
Hey, I'm one of those for the record. Half my life in Ohio. I'm still pretty concerned, honestly. I just feel like Ohio State fans, they travel really well. They wear red. They're going to be out in force. And it kind of reminds me of the World Series a few years ago when it was my Cleveland Indians and your Chicago Cubs. Ticket prices were twice as expensive at Wrigley than they were in Cleveland. And Cubs fans would just buy the tickets to go to the games in Cleveland because it really wasn't that far away. It was a drive. And then in Game 7, you've got like a 60-40 split slightly in favor of Cleveland. But the thing is, the majority of Indians fans, I would guess, are not as well off as, say, Notre Dame season ticket holders. So at least with them, you could give them the excuse of like, well, they're making, probably the cost of their entire season ticket investment plus more by selling their tickets to one single World Series game. But if you're a Notre Dame season ticket holder, like, come on. Like, do you really need the money? Like, it's so frustrating to me. And I just feel like there's a lot of people, there's a decent chunk of Notre Dame season ticket holders who frankly don't care that much about wins and losses and then therefore don't understand their own impact on the game when they actually attend rather than selling it to an opposing fan.
Seems to be a theme.
Well, you're going to be at the game. Like, we have you on record saying that you will perform an audit at the ticket register and you'll be working hand in hand with the Notre Dame ushers to ensure that Ohio State fans are not allowed in.
You get me in touch with those people, let me know. Let me know how I can help because I would love to do that.
All right. That's a good way to end it. Luke, we've run out of time. Thanks again for coming on. We'll do it again soon.
All right. Thank you.
That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Irish. I hope you guys enjoyed my conversation with Luke, and thanks as always for making this your first listen of the day. Before you leave and get a head start in your weekend, remember to subscribe to the show and give us a follow on Twitter at Locked On Irish, on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod, and my personal Twitter account at Tyler WOJCIAK. Enjoy the weekend, everybody, and I'll see you next week.